It's been more than 3 years since Saudi Arabia led an economic and diplomatic siege on Qatar that divided the Gulf nations. But now there could be a breakthrough in sight. Hopes for an end to the crisis have grown after U.S. brokered talks to resolve the dispute, which many analysts see as a last-ditch effort by the White House to secure more diplomatic wins in the Middle East before President Donald Trump leaves office. Before we discuss what has changed in the past 3 years and whether the Saudi-Qatar ties can be repaired, let's take a look at this report to see what was the dispute all about. And joining me now from Muscat is Abdullah Baabood, who is a visiting professor at Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan, and former director of the Center for Gulf Studies at Qatar University. And from Washington, D.C., Giorgio Cafiero, founder and CEO of Gulf State Analytics, a geopolitical risk consultancy focusing on the Middle East. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So Abdullah, Saudi foreign minister said a final agreement is expected soon. What do you think this agreement is comprised of?
Well, we have been hearing some bits and pieces of news from here and there. It's not definitely sure what is going to include. However, the fact that there is a move towards reconciliation between Qatar and its neighbors is actually good news for the region and also for the organization of the Gulf Cooperation Council. I think mostly it will comprise of the ability of these countries to work together and to build their own regional institution, which is the GCC. Mm-hmm. It will obviously tackle some of the thorny issues that have been raised before, not necessarily the 13 demands that came in the when initially the blockade started, mm-hmm. But I'm sure there are other issues that they can include, even if it's for a face-saving arrangement, just to show to the people that this was not done in vain, and we've got something out of Qatar.
As you've just mentioned, Doha promised to maintain its policies and is refused fulfilling any demands that undermine its sovereignty, Georgia. So what has been achieved or lost after this 3-year blockade of Qatar?
Well, there is trust that has been seriously eroded between Qatar on one side and the blockading states on the other. Perhaps a piece of paper can be signed to reestablish diplomatic and economic relations, but there's going to be a future in which it will be very difficult for us to imagine officials in Doha having any sort of trust in the GCC. Could it be established over time? Certainly. But, this crisis will have an impact on the way in which the people and the government of Qatar look at their neighbors on the Arabian Peninsula and how they look at the GCC as an institution. And, there are many problems that will continue between Qatar and the countries that spent the past 3.5 years blockading Qatar. That being said, this is definitely a positive move in the right direction, but we'll have to see what happens in the weeks, months, and years ahead.
So, Abdullah, why do you think the outgoing President Trump is pushing for a deal just before he leaves office? What's at stake for the U.S. or for Trump?
Well, I think there are different scenarios to explain what happened. First of all, we have to remember that Trump was instrumental in actually in the beginning of this crisis. If it wasn't for him, this crisis would probably not happen. That's one thing. And maybe he wants to leave with it behind him. But I think it's more than that. I think he wants to get the GCC states back together in his efforts towards this maximum pressure towards Iran. Because from his perspective, Iran benefits from this crisis. Obviously, everybody benefited from this crisis except the GCC states themselves. It's been costly to everybody. And I think he also wanted to deprive the forthcoming president, Biden, from any credit to say that he has done it.
Maybe
so
he would like to use it as a bid for re-election in 2024. So, Giorgio, the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Tehran is preparing to install hundreds of advanced uranium-enriching centrifuges. So how could a unified Gulf will impact Iran's influence in the region?
Well, I think it's important to realize that as a consequence of the blockade, Doha had essentially no choice but to turn to Tehran for deeper cooperation. And I think the hope is that if at least the Saudis end their blockade of Qatar, Doha would become less dependent on Iran, and possibly Doha would move more back to the sort of Arabian fold against Iran, if you will. However, I think that this might be a little bit too optimistic from the standpoint of those in the U.S. administration who want GCC states to unite against Iran. I don't see Doha embracing some aggressive anti-Iranian foreign policy. Again, even if there's a restoration of ties between Riyadh and Doha, I think officials in Doha will probably continue to see the Saudi kingdom posing a bigger threat to Qatar's sovereignty than Iran. I think Qatar will try to balance its neighbors against one another rather than firmly siding with Saudi Arabia against Iran. Having said that, though, it's important to keep in mind that the Qataris have had to use Iranian airspace as a consequence of the siege that went into effect in 2017. And this has provided Iran with revenue, which the Trump administration would like to see Iran cease to benefit from. And I think that could definitely be an outcome from the Saudis opening up their airspace to Qatar if this is going to happen.
So at the end of the day, Abdullah, what do you think has prompted those nations, Saudi Arabia in particular, of course, to come to an agreement with Qatar?
Basically has demonstrated that there is no rationality in the decision-making within the GCC. And the GCC is very important to Saudi Arabia and to also other member states.
Do you believe that the MBS is taking a back seat now?
That may be one way of looking at it, but I also think that the Saudis have realized that that they wanted to reconcile some time ago, and this is not the first time that we've seen a breakthrough. There has been some discussions between them and Qatar several times, but it has fallen on deaf ears. And I think now, because of the pressure, it seems that they are moving. It may be that the MBS wants to take a back seat as well, because there is a lot of pressure on him with the upcoming presidents, Biden, who's been promising that he would be more critical of Saudi Arabia than Trump was.
So, Giorgio, what do you make of the recent contact between Saudi King Salman and Turkish President Erdogan? Do you believe that Saudi Arabia is revisiting its foreign policy? And do you believe that Turkey and Saudi Arabia can come to better terms moving forward?
Answer to your two questions is yes. I think that as a consequence of the change in leadership in Washington, Saudi Arabia is starting to revisit some of the important aspects of its foreign policy. I think what we might be seeing right now is a switch in Riyadh's foreign policy away from more bellicose, aggressive policies toward ones which are more pragmatic. And this is not to say that Saudi Arabia and Turkey are about to have an excellent relationship. There are many conflicts of interest between Riyadh and Ankara. Those are not about to go away. But again, I think there's going to be an easing of friction between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And I don't think that the United States is the only factor in play, but I do think the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration is a very, very important variable in the equation.
So, Abdullah, very briefly, if Saudi Arabia and Qatar make a peace and relations take a positive turn between Saudi Arabia and Turkey, how will this impact the United Arab Emirates?
From the Saudi perspective, they'd like to see the other countries do the same. And this is what they have actually announced as well. So I think they will push their other partners to do the same. I think the United Arab Emirates is also, been having some very active foreign policy. And I think with the new administration, with the changes in the geopolitics, regionally and internationally, I think we will see some kind of a toning down of some of the UAE foreign policy and more, rationality into that and less activism.
And we will see how likely it is for Egypt to join any reconciliation deal with Qatar as long as Doha continue to support the Muslim Brotherhood. Gentlemen, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.